My name is Rabbi Jeremy Markiz, and today I'm going to talk about a dilemma that the Jewish calendar provides for us and something we're going to have to navigate, which is when I'm recording this in 2025, we are told by the Talmud that we should enter Adar with joy, that we should increase our joy in the month of Adar. It says in the Talmud, which we'll learn in a second, Mishenichnas Adar, marbin besimcha. We should increase our joy when we enter the month of Adar. But the question becomes, when the world is so broken, when there's so much suffering, when there's so much grief happening in the Jewish world and beyond, how could we possibly feel that way? How could we possibly feel joyous? And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about some of that internal work, things we can do, and how do we manage this tension. Now, I want to offer a caveat. I'm not going to tell you how to feel. I'm not going to tell you that you should feel joy no matter what. I'm not going to tell you that you should feel anything other than what you feel. Even the texts that seem to suggest that, I don't think mean that. And we're going to look at that together. And so I invite you, as we learn this together, not to see this as you must feel a particular thing. And I don't think that's what the tradition is inviting us to feel. And we'll unpack that as we go. But I want to say right at the top that you should feel however you need to feel. Life is complicated. Feelings are complicated. Jewish holidays can be complicated. And it's okay to hold all of that together in tension, but also in growth in the way that we move through these moments. With that in mind, we're going to jump right into the text here, and we'll do that. It says in the Talmud the following. It quotes the Mishnah, which says, "From when the month of Av, which is in the summer, begins, one decreases acts of rejoicing." This has to do with the holiday of Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, which observes the destruction of Jerusalem and begins the season of the high holidays, which includes the month of Elul, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot. And so one of the things that we're starting to see already beginning is that we have a whole calendar full of holidays or commemorations that invite us to feel a particular thing, or at least that the tradition encourages us to feel a particular thing. Rav Yehuda, back in the text now, son of Rav Shmuel bar Shelat, said in the name of Rav, so now we're commenting on what that Mishnah text from Av is saying, just as when Av begins, one decreases rejoicing, so too when the month of Adar begins, one increases rejoicing. So here, Rav Yehuda is providing us a just as, so too framework, which is just as this first thing is true, so too the second thing is true. And here he's saying, just as in the month of Av, when we decrease our joy in mourning and commemoration of this destruction, in Adar, we increase our rejoicing. Adar is a month in the Jewish calendar that happens at the end of winter, beginning of spring. It precedes Passover and the month of Nisan by about a month. And sometimes it's 2 months, sometimes it's 1 month, sometimes there's 2 Adars. Either way, that this season is for rejoicing. And Rashi, the preeminent French commentator, says, whoever enters Adar, Mishenichnas Adar, the reason why one should feel rejoicing, increased rejoicing, is because there were days of miracles that were for the Jewish people, represented by the holidays of Purim and Pesach, of Passover. And so I want to say a couple of things right off the bat. First is Purim commemorates the holiday in which we read and identify with the book of Esther. Esther and the Jewish people are facing destruction, and through her wit and cunning and the support of her uncle Mordechai, she saves the Jewish people. And it is seen as a tremendous victory. And Passover observes or celebrates the creation of the people through their exodus from Egypt, as described in the book of Exodus. So those are the reasons why we would observe Adar and this season as one that is joyous. Now, this phrase, Mishenichnas Adar, marbin besimcha, has become a song that people sing. And you'll forgive me because I'm going to sing it. It goes something along these lines. Misha, 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 Mishenichnas Adar. Misha, 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 Mishenichnas Adar. Mishenichnas Adar, marbin besimcha. It goes on like that. I'm not going to keep singing it. But that is a song you might hear during this season, and in fact comes from this quote in the Talmud. Now, it's interesting to note that this text does not appear in the halachic sources like the Mishnah Torah and the Shulchan Aruch, and so it lives in this section from the Talmud, and we use it as inspiration for the way we celebrate this holiday. All of this is to say, we have this instruction, this guide that we should be joyous, and we should increase our joy, certainly as best as we can. And so the question for us in this moment is, how do we manage, how do we navigate this instruction when it feels so impossible to feel joy, so impossible in the face of such suffering? The first text we're going to look at is from the Eish Kodesh. Eish Kodesh is a rabbi whose last name is Shapira. He was a rabbi, a Hasidic Rebbe, who lived in the Warsaw Ghetto. He himself experienced tremendous suffering, and there are a few people who understand suffering better than him. And this whole collection of Eish Kodesh, the name of the book, speaks to some of these issues. And here, this is what he says about Purim. It is found in the Tikkunei HaZohar, which is a collection of mystical texts, that Purim is like Yom Kippurim, an alternative way to referring to Yom Kippur. So already we have a turn of phrase happening here, and this is a common comparison that's made, that Purim and Yom Kippur, they have this textual relationship in terms of the spelling of the words. Yom Kippurim is a way that Yom Kippur is referenced. That there is a relationship between the two. And so this is a common thing that rabbis often do. And so not that it should be familiar with you, but that it is familiar in rabbinic text to make this comparison. Interestingly enough, even if we look at the original text from Ta'anit, from the Talmud, here, we already have a relationship between Av, the summer holiday, the summer month, and the holiday of Tisha B'Av, which sets off the high holiday season. It's really, in some ways, the beginning. So we're already starting to see the comparison between these seasons of the year. Going on, it says, it could be that this also hints to the following. That just like on Yom Kippur, the fast and the repentance on that day are not dependent on whether a person wants to do them or wants to engage in them, that the person does them only then. Which is to say, that Yom Kippur happens whether or not we like it. It's always on the same day every year. It happens. It's objective in that way. And we have to show up with a particular mode on that day. We choose to do it then, right? That's what it means. We're doing it on that day because that's the day, and it happens sort of regardless of whether or not we like it. It's like Shabbat happens every Friday night and Saturday, regardless of how we feel. That's sort of the thinking here. Rather, whether one wants to or not, they have to do them because they are a decree of the Holy One, blessed be God, which is to say, we have this system in which we are commanded to do things, and here too, repentance, tshuva, is a framework, things that we do on Yom Kippur. So too with the joy of Purim. It is not only if a person is joyful on their own, or at the very least is able to bring themselves to joy, that they must rejoice. Rather, even if they are low and their heart is broken, their mind and all of their spirit trampled, it is a statute that they must, at the very least, bring a spark of happiness to their heart. Which is to say, just like on Yom Kippur, when the day, the focus is about repentance and tshuva, and that inspires our feelings, because that's the day when we allow ourselves to feel that way, although we can and should feel that way all throughout the year, that we can do tshuva, and we can. That on Purim, it's the same thing with joy. That even if our hearts are broken, even if we feel trampled, that there is still room for happiness and joy, and we can make room for it. Now, I want to be really clear about two things. One is the measurement of how much joy he's inspiring for us, which is the word nitzutz, which is spark. It doesn't have to be a lot. A spark is just a moment. Which is to say, the second thing is, you can feel more than one thing at a time. That's what this is reminding us. It's not that you can't feel low and broken, but that there is still room for a spark of happiness and joy. And that's valuable to us. Feeling more than one thing at a time is of value to us. I think it's so important for us to remember, as human beings, we rarely feel one thing at a time. We almost always feel more than one thing. I can feel happy and hungry at the same time. I can feel happy and sad at the same time. Having a spark of happiness does not negate the other feelings you might be feeling. In fact, the balance between the two is so key. If we only felt one thing, we would be missing out. Not just on the experience of a particular holiday, but in life. We are not meant to feel only one thing. And here, the Yesh Kodesh reminds us, if we can get a spark, it's valuable. I'll say one other thing. I was a rabbi in Pittsburgh in 2018 when we experienced a tragedy. And one of the things that we focused on, the rabbis of that time period in that location, was reminding people that it is still okay to play with your kids, to not read the news, to take time to find joy in life while you feel these other things. And I think the same thing is true here. And at any point when we are asked to feel more than one thing, that there is room for it, that it is okay to feel joy amidst grief. If you find yourself at a shiva, at a gathering after someone has died, yes, it's a sad moment. And yet, one of the most common things that happens at a shiva is sharing happy and joyous stories about the deceased. There is room for more than one feeling. That isn't to say you don't feel sad. Of course, you do. But that it's okay to make room for the spark of happiness that can exist. Which brings us to our next text here. This is from the Kutei Eitzot, which is Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. And you might be familiar with this first phrase, and if not, that's okay too. And we're going to unpack it, so don't be fearful yet. It's mitzvah gedola lihiyot b'simcha tamid. That's the first phrase here. It is a great mitzvah to be happy always, at all times. Even though what we're about to read is going to be so prescriptive about how we should feel all the time, I don't think it means what it means on the surface, and we're going to unpack it together. It's a great mitzvah to be happy at all times. Be determined to keep away from depression and aim to be happy constantly. Now, I want to just quick side note, quick detour here. There's going to be words for depression here. And again, this is translated from quite some time ago. And so we need to hold more than one meaning for these terms. Now, it's important to note, before I even go on, that Rabbi Nachman famously suffered tremendously with depression and comes to this question of joy and challenge and suffering, of which he experienced a lot of, we can take that he has something to offer us with this tension. Okay, back inside. Be determined to keep away from depression and aim to be happy constantly. Happiness is the remedy for all kinds of diseases. Many illnesses are caused by depression. We can pause here for a moment to note that we're not going to take medical advice from Rabbi Nachman, but we can remember that the relationship between our mind, our body, our emotions are interwoven together, and how we feel and how our body feels are in relationship. Back inside, you must be resourceful in order to make yourself happy. Often you must do something a little bit crazy in order to make yourself happy. Try hard to turn your very depression and worry into joy. If you really set your mind to it, you will easily find that even amidst the worst troubles and suffering, there's an opening which you can use to convert all the depression into joy. True joy is when you drag your darkness and depression even against their will and force them to turn into happiness. So let me say the following. It seems on its surface that Rabbi Nachman is saying you should move from one extreme to the other. That if you are feeling dark and low, that you should move to light and joy in its extreme. I don't think that's what this means. This isn't a framework of advice. It's a reminder that we all feel at some point the darkness and challenge and suffering and troubles that beset human life and human people, and that we must be careful not to let it overwhelm and control us. This is why I found the imagery at the last sentence so powerful, which is to find joy isn't that you move it all the way to one end, is that you drag yourself back into the middle. The Rambam teaches in Hilchot Deot, the laws of human dispositions, that we should find a delicate balance whenever possible. That we should never lean too far into the extremes. Which is to say that here, it's okay to bring, it's like the Eish Kodesh, a spark of joy with us so that we don't lose ourselves along the edge. And I love this phrase, you must be resourceful in order to make yourself happy. There are lots of ways to make yourself feel something different than how you're feeling now. Could be art, could be music, could be reading, could be a game, it could be joy with family, spending time with family. It's okay to think creatively about how you feel and how to change how you feel or to invite other feelings in. Now, I want to be clear. I'm not a doctor, not a psychiatrist. I'm not speaking about depression in a medical sense here, right? You should see a physician if that's what you need. Getting help is always good. That's part of what being resourceful can look like. But that what the Rabbi Nachman is inviting us to do is to recognize the possibility for joy in any moment. Now, I know we sort of drifted our way a little bit from Purim, which is the context of our learning here, but that we can invite a little joy by being resourceful into our lives, to not let it control us, but to stay in a form of agency in relationship to that, our feelings, that we do have some control. Don't get me wrong, I have broken into tears many times over the last few years as I think through the suffering that is in existence with the Jewish people and beyond. It's not that we don't feel things. It's that we have to be wary about letting ourselves feel the extremes, which is an exact invitation for this next text. This is a quote, a story from the Tales of Hasidim, which is a book translated by Martin Buber. This is on page 231. And it's a story in which the Rebbe of a particular group of Hasidim is asked a question and he provides an answer. And I think this is a really interesting way to start to unpack the different kinds of joy and sorrow that we might be feeling. So the Rabbi is asked by his students, what is the right way, that of sorrow or that of joy? Which on its surface is a ridiculous question, right? Which is to say, it's asking a question about extremes. What is the right way? Should we feel only one feeling or another? Already a ridiculous question, but it's a great opportunity for us to think through what it means to have a framework like joy and sorrow. What do these words really mean? And this is how he answered. There are two kinds of joy and two kinds of sorrow and two kinds of joy. When a person broods over the misfortunes that have come upon them, and they cower in the corner and despairs, that is a bad kind of sorrow. The other kind is the honest kind of grief of a person who knows that what they lack. Which is to say, the two kinds of sorrow that he's presenting here are the ones in which we let it overwhelm us to the point where we cannot do anything. We are stuck in the corner. And look, let's be clear, we might all have felt this at some point. Again, these are feelings they have. I don't particularly love the bad versus good type framework here. So maybe we could say that this is the first kind of sorrow here is unsustainable. That this kind of sorrow is overwhelming in a way that's not good to us as a person. The other kind is the honest kind of grief, a person who knows what they lack, which is to say, a sorrow that is reflective of, we are experiencing a misfortune. We are now lacking something that we had, or we're lacking something that we need. It's okay to have honest feelings. That's what this is telling us. But that this isn't necessarily staying within the framework of overwhelming. Right? Such to the point that we can't act at all. And the same is true of joy. I'm in the second paragraph here. One who is devoid of inner substance and in the midst of empty pleasures does not feel it nor tries to fill their lack is a fool. Strong language here, I know. But one who is truly joyful is like a person whose house has burned down, who feels their need deep in their soul and begins to build anew. Over every stone that is laid, their heart rejoices. Which is to say, when we use external joy that isn't substantial, is itself unsustainable, this is not a long-term solution, to sort of retranslate this. Which is to say, there are times when I just want to watch The Office and stop focusing on the world, and there's nothing wrong with that. But that ultimately is a fleeting joy from the kind of joy that recognizes that there is a future. And that's the second joy here being described, which is, it's not that you don't mourn over the world around you feeling burned down, who feels that need, right? That's what he's described. Someone who's truly feeling suffering and grief and all of that, who recognizes that there is still a future worth building. That shift, that tiny shift of mentality is saying, yes, this is bad, and I'm going to feel everything I need to feel about it. And I know that there is a future worth rebuilding. That is real, true joy in this framework. Now, again, I'm not suggesting you should feel anything other than what you feel. Each of these texts that we've learned so far are frameworks, or mechanisms, or tools, or language that we can use to answer this question, how do I enter Adar with joy amidst suffering? And I think part of this here is recognizing that there is still a future. That is a piece of this puzzle here. And I think, before we get to our final text, that sort of by way of summary of the three texts that we learned so far, the Eish Kodesh, the Rebbe Nachman, and here this Hasidic story, that each of them are offering a language and a framework, as I just said, around joy, that it's okay to feel more than one thing. That it's okay not to let ourselves go to the extreme, and that if we need to, we should be resourceful, Even Rabbi Nachman says, do something a little crazy to make sure we don't lose ourselves. That means getting help when you need it. That means being in community. That's finding joy. And I think what the Hasidic master is teaching us in the Martin Buber's translation of Tales of the Hasidim is that we cannot let ourselves feel both a sorrow that is unsustainable and a joy that is fleeting. That those extremes are ultimately unsustainable. And that feeling your feelings and having grief is real and okay and good, and so is real joy, which is the understanding that the future still exists. That I have to be working, laying one stone after another for that future. That those things are not mutually exclusive, but in fact mutually inclusive. That both are necessary. And so the question we're left with is, okay, Mishenichnas Adar, whoever enters Adar, marbin b'simcha, that we should increase our joy. So how do we do that if we're feeling joy? The Eish Kodesh would tell us a spark of joy is enough. Rabbi Nachman would tell us, don't let the grief overwhelm everything else. And what this Hasidic master would say is, a true joy is recognizing that there is a future and taking a step, even a small one, towards that future. And the final text I want to take us offers, I think, a more specific example, which is the Mishnah Torah, the Rambam, says the following, that one of the mitzvot of Purim can be a really powerful tool in this moment, in this year. There are 4 mitzvot of Purim. There is hearing the Megillah being read, mishloach manot, sending gifts to friends. There is the Purim Seudah, the joy, the feasting meal, and matanot evyonim, providing resources to the poor and the needy. Here's what the Mishnah Torah says. It is preferable for a person to be more liberal with their donations to the poor than to be lavish in their preparation for the Purim feast or sending portions to their friends. Which is to say, if we are going to put our hierarchy in terms of the commandments for Purim, more resources to helping the needy is preferable over the other 2. For there is no greater, I'm reading inside now, there is no greater or more splendid happiness than to gladden the hearts of the poor, the orphans, the widows. Here the language is of converts, right? People who dwell among us, the gerim, anyone who dwells amongst us. One who brings happiness to the hearts of these unfortunate individuals resembles the divine presence. We are like God when we do this, which Isaiah 57:15 describes as having the tendency to revive the spirit of the lowly and to revive those with broken hearts. What the Rambam is teaching us, reminding us, is that Purim has a framework for a joy that is not centered on ourselves, but in the support of those who are vulnerable, those who are in need, those who need help and support. And that we already have a framework to support those individuals amidst the holiday, and that supporting those people is a real joy, a true joy, a meaningful joy, a valuable joy. We can help other people. That is a way to bring joy to our lives. It might be that I'm feeling tremendous suffering, but if I can take any amount of energy to support someone or a community that needs support, that's good. That brings good. That brings joy in a more fundamental sense that we might have understood before. And here, the verse he uses from Isaiah identifies, holds us in this space, which is that when we give, it helps us revive our broken hearts. To give, to be generous, has value. Not just to us, but to them, to everyone. That the system is improved as a whole when we're generous with our time and our resources and supporting others. And so I invite you, sort of at the end of this learning, when we ask the question, what do we do? How do we navigate this question of entering Adar and experiencing Purim with happiness and with grief, that there's room for it. That both things can be true, and that we have the ability to make that more sustainable, more real, and that we don't have to abandon any one feeling. That there is room in our hearts, in our souls, in our communities, in our experiences to feel more than one thing. And even if that joy is just a spark, even if that joy is a single action that moves us forward in the future, a single action of generosity, that's a good thing. That can be enough for this year and for any year when you feel like the feelings we're being asked to feel by the tradition don't feel right. And so I invite you to engage in Adar and Purim, perhaps with new eyes, and that this might relieve some of this tension that I know many of us are feeling. Happy Adar, grieving Adar, holding many feelings Adar, and a Purim Sameach.